And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to assign moderated content to specific users to edit or approve it before publishing? There's a module for that. It's called Workflow Participants, and it was originally created in February of 2017. It has 8.x-2.6 versions available for D8 and D9, as well as a 3.0.0 Alpha 1, which works with Drupal 9 and 10. Now, it officially says it's seeking a new maintainer. So if you feel inspired by what you hear today, maybe reach out and look into that. It currently has 17 open issues, only 3 of which are bugs, and it does have test coverage. Now, according to Drupal.org, it's currently in use by 9 Drupal websites, and it's maintained by Jay Hedstrom, who maintains a stable of modules of his own, including a number in the message stack. Now, the way Workflow Participant works is it creates a new tab on nodes, which allow a content creator or anyone with the necessary permission to assign one or more editors or reviewers. Now, they can specifically designate which roles can be editors or reviewers. You don't necessarily have to search through like all of your different users. And editors have the ability to make changes and transition content between states, while reviewers can only move the content between states. Now, for each transition in your workflow, you can specify if editors and or approvers are able to perform that transition. And it can optionally send a notification email to workflow participants as they are added to a specific piece of content. Now, I used to have a boss who liked to say the surest way to starve a dog is to put 2 people in charge of feeding it. So this idea of being able to specifically assign individuals 2 pieces of content to me seems very powerful. So let's talk about workflow participants.
Yeah, sounds great. I have a question though. Once somebody's kind of piece is done, are they able to remove themselves from notifications, or if they add themselves, they're just permanently going to get notified about the content?
So my understanding is that the way the notifications work is it only sends them an email when they first get added to a piece of content. So as the content is transitioned between states, it wouldn't necessarily automatically send additional notifications, although I suspect if it's compatible with something like ECA, potentially you could, add logic to trigger additional notifications if you wanted to.
One question I have, and I may have just missed this while you were describing it, but can a user, so if a user creates a piece of content, can they define who it gets sent to, like out of a list of like, hey, these are the 5 approvers for this type of content, send it to one of them?
That's exactly the way it works. So it does that as a tab, although again, there's sort of a permission for being able to assign workflow participants. So it's kind of up to the site builder to decide whether that content creator can assign those workflow participants themselves, or whether somebody else needs to do that. I think the other thing actually I neglected to mention is it does also have a submodule which basically you can assign default participants. So you could say, anytime somebody files an event, always make this person the editor, or those kinds of things as well.
That's what I was kind of getting at there. I think a little bit was like, hey, can you default it if need be? So one type of content always goes to somebody if you don't want your users to have that much control. But that sounds very cool.
I imagine you get some really flexible configurations with this, with the incoming policy-based permissions that was pitched at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's another one that's very, very interesting to me around permissioning, because listen, we can go down a rabbit hole on permissioning, but you will put a link in the show notes about policy-based permissions. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, there's a lot of sort of business complexities often around sort of that whole idea of permissions and who can edit what content. So I feel like this is a great solution, but yeah, the policy-based access is definitely, I think, also an exciting innovation happening in the Drupal space right now.
Yeah, workflow is always one of the things that I kind of keep in the back of my mind as one of the strengths of Drupal. I find that not a lot of projects need it, and the projects that ask for it usually don't need it either. But the projects that do actually need it need a lot of it usually. And if you didn't have something like workflow and the workflow ecosystem and these types of tools, I don't even know how to begin building it. It's so complex to have that extra layer, but Drupal handle, since Drupal 7 has handled it really well.
It's very interesting too. Like permission granularity is something that is like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's evolving or if it's just always been there and I've never really had a need for it. But like, I feel like the more complex projects get, the more granularity you need over those permissions and those workflows and who can do what and when. And, I think all of the stuff we've just been talking about kind of helps to make that system better.
Yep. One last question for you, Martin. Does this tie in? Do you know if this ties in at all to that preview module that you use on your blog for sharing content? Because I think that'd be an interesting use case if you were able to say, like, I need this person to look at it. They don't have an account. They need to preview it, but I need them to approve it. That'd be a...
So I feel like those are probably different use cases. The preview unpublished, I think that's the one you're talking about, is really about saying, I want to be able to give people who aren't users in the system the ability to come in and review something before it's published, whereas workflow participants is really about assigning people who are users to have sort of additional permissions in terms of being able to push things through the workflow, potentially with the ability to make changes as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna hack that for you, Nick, and say like you could create a user with the email for the person. They could get an emailed link to the unpublished thing that they need to review, but then there's really no way for them to approve it to move it to the next step of the workflow, right? So,
yeah, I mean the use case I was thinking of is that bigger projects always have something like this. The upper level stakeholder that doesn't have the time to log in but still wants to review a particular piece of content. So if you combine those two, like they have the ability to approve it, but they don't have to have an account and remember it to log in. I mean, I think it's kind of narrow, but those types of projects always have issues. But
yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe there's a way to use something like content moderation link along with accessed unpublished to sort of give that senior stakeholder the ability to potentially move something between states. But I feel like you'd want to be pretty careful about permissions so that it doesn't become a way that anybody with the link, suddenly is able to push content between states.
Wait a second. This might be a twofer today. What does content moderation link do?
So content moderation link creates basically a token that you can use to push a piece of content between different workflow states. So you could say, as an example, as part of the email notification that goes out using something like Workbench email, or even your ECA notifications if you're using that, include basically a link that would say, as an editor, I can look at this, maybe see that, oh, well, John knows what he's talking about in this subject, so I don't need to review it. I can just tap this link and that'll go and directly, move that content to published as an example.
Well, there you go. That solves your problem right there, Nick. Just send them two links in the email, one to the preview that they need to look at, and the other one to say, once you agree with it, click here and send it on to the next phase.
that works.
There you go. No logins.
That works.
Life made easier with Drupal.
Well, I'll say the potential complication of that scenario is that currently content moderation link does rely on user permissions. So it wouldn't, by nature of having the link, you would still need to sort of like log in and have the permission to perform that transition. So it doesn't override that, but maybe that's a feature that could be added.
Oh boy. This feels like we could just talk about this for the next 30 minutes.
I love these little discussions, and you're finding really interesting modules to talk about. So I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Martin. As always, another interesting module to talk about, and on to our primary topic.